Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now, here is your host, mother of 10, Danusha Melina Durban.
Hello and welcome back to the School for Mothers podcast. I'm Danusha Melina Durban, your host. Let's dive into today's episode.
Well, welcome to the What's the Worst That Can Happen podcast with me, Suzanne Dibble, where I discuss with small business owners the legal challenges that they faced whilst growing their business and explain to them what really is the worst that can happen in their business. If you need to know more about the issues that we discuss in this podcast, please go to suzannedibble.com/podcast resources, where you can find resources on vital legal protections such as applying for a trademark, content protection, working with freelancers, hiring employees, GDPR, and a lot more. Well, today on the podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Danusha Melina Durban, who heads up a leadership development consultancy, helping boards and senior teams with strategy. And we've got a really interesting legal challenge for you today, one that certainly hasn't cropped up on any of my other podcast interviews, and one that I'm sure probably won't be popping up on any others. Two very interesting stories from Danusha's business time. So Danusha, thank you so much for being here. I know you're an exceptionally busy lady, so thank you for squeezing me in.
Thank you.
So let's tell people a little bit more about your business, because heads up a leadership development consultancy. I know that you actually do much more than that. I know that you're an author of many books, two of which have the very interesting titles, the short titles, Noise and Spunk. I'm sure you can fill in the remaining part of the title. But tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh, yeah, of course. I'll keep it quick. I used to be an academic, so in a business school, and I was a tenured academic, very much a career academic. And then I actually transitioned. I built my company, my current company, my only company, while still full-time working as a senior academic. So my specialism is organizational behavior and development. So that's both the way that people behave in organizations and also the way that we build our organizations. So strategy, decision-making, and the way that we, execute leadership, if you like. That I don't mean shoot them, but I mean actually operationalize that from a psychological perspective. So I guess akin to an industrial psychologist, if we had that in the UK.
On the because I know you also have the sort of more parenting side to what you've been doing recently with your podcasts, School for Mothers and School for Fathers, and your books as well. So do you want to just say a little bit more about those and your books?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3.5 years ago, I decided on the back of I'm a mum of 10, 6 sons.
Can I just stop you there? Mum of 10, in case that just passed you by. So this is a lady that not only has developed an enormously successful business whilst working full-time in education, also has brought up 10 children, which as a mother of 2, that's the thing that I'm most impressed with, aside from your other huge accolades of business success. I always take my hat off to you. I think, oh my gosh, what a massive achievement. And
thank you.
And to be able to juggle that with such a successful business is truly stunning.
It's a task, and I'm human, so it's not always as seamless as I like, but nevertheless I do have 10 children. And as you know, Susanna, the last batch, the last baby, when a woman says, yes, well, come on then, let's have a last baby, or the couple do, turned into triplets. So I didn't aim for 10 but got 10, which is very much a gift, really a gift. So yes, so I, as a result of that extensive experience, but also because I was constantly being asked about, the juggle, the experience of the business, the career, and the children. Actually, I started School for Mothers 3.5 years ago, and that was very successful. So a year after that, I felt it was important to have the conversations with fathers, with men, which was really quite entertaining because people were kind of like, what? Aren't you going to have a male host? Are they going to talk to you? But of course, in my business consulting, at very senior levels, a lot of, not all, but a lot of the senior teams are men. So yes, of course they talk. And why wouldn't they? So I've been doing that. And the books, Noise, and Manifesto Modernizing Motherhood, and Spunk, a Manifesto Modernizing Fatherhood, are actually really synthesized my experience. So part memoir, Noises. And I know that women and men are really enjoying those memoir pieces because they're very raw. But for the fatherhood book, I recently undertook a piece of research. Obviously, can't take the academic out of woman. I did a big piece of research with fathers around the world, and that's what the book is about. How are men feeling about fatherhood? And actually, what do they do? What are the things that men do as fathers? And that was fascinating. So that's only been out for a few weeks. So, it's fresh. There's a really good reason why I called it Spunk. Just so you know, it wasn't to be salacious. The original etymology of spunk is nothing to do with, anything that's the vernacular of it that we might say is a swear word. No. It's about courage and mettle, like backbone. I'm using that. I'm using that as the core. And yeah, so anyway, it's fun. It's quite difficult to talk about. So I've had people say, could it rhyme with something else, please? Well, yes, it can. It can rhyme with hunk, if you like. So, that's me in a nutshell. Books, podcast, the consulting. Yeah.
Wonderful. And 10 children.
Lots of kids.
Let's talk about your I think fascinating business background, and but more so for this podcast, your very interesting legal challenge that you had as part of that. Mm-hmm. So I know the sort of vague details of it, but do you want to, and I know you can't name names for obvious reasons, but do you want to talk us through what happened? And I know that you did ultimately, I think, resolve to your satisfaction, but at the time it must have been, a challenging situation to face. So talk us through it.
So I got it into my head that I would start writing for television, not as an alternative career, but as an additional career. I'm one of those people that likes to fire on many cylinders. And the creative challenge of seeing whether I could write for television, and what I mean is writing TV shows, that I saw that there were gaps. We weren't creating anything in this genre, and it's business that I was interested in. And there were some as a result, but nevertheless, I started to think about what that would take. And so I found myself in a position that I was pitching to I actually can say who this is. I have permission for this. I pitched to Psycho, Simon Cowell, and his right-hand man, Nigel Hall. And I pitched the idea. So it took actually it was 6 weeks, Suzanne, from my thinking, do you know what I think I'll write for TV, to being in a room in Psycho in London and hearing the smack on the table saying, stop, we're optioning it. We're optioning. I didn't even know what that meant, just so you know. I was like, what does optioning mean? I smiled and said, oh, that's great.
That presumably means they want the first option on it when it's...
Yeah, that actually what that means is that they're going to pay money to take it off the market and start pre-production with you, as in developing the idea. They will pay to have you keep it just for them and develop it with them. So that's what happened. I obviously didn't anticipate that, and it was an incredible experience. And what they do is that they take it for a year, and then they develop the idea and then go into pre-production. They sell it with you. Yeah. Anyway, for one reason or another, and that's exactly what we did. Actually, I learned a great deal because obviously, if anyone knows Psycho and Simon Cowell, he's into entertainment. It's not documentary style. It's, its genre wasn't really the genre that I was building. So that was the first lesson. Yeah. Partner up with somebody that is the right genre. But I have to say, I'm deeply grateful. I cut my teeth in TV with giants, which was fantastic. Fast forward a year, a bit more, and actually I was able to take it anywhere else, because we'd all agreed I didn't want to do an entertainment like we're talking about senior bosses. I wouldn't want to ham them up in public. That would destroy my business. I'm sorry. So we realized that actually it was probably best if I take it and they helped me and we sold it, but it would not be through Psycho. I mean, that's a very shorthand, and it was a fantastic partnership. So there was no problems. It got picked up. It got picked up both by a production company and it got picked up by channels. There was a little, what's the word? I wouldn't want to overham this, but there was interest from multiple channels, and I'm talking the major ones. So it was very exciting times, and everything was going ahead. One got it, and we were okay. We were off, which means it was starting to go into pre-production and then production. I received an email to say, out of the blue, to say it's not happening anymore, and I was like, oh. Apart from what? I was like, oh, this is very strange. And there was a number of reasons that they weren't going to go ahead, the channel and the production company. And one of them was that they didn't feel that they needed an expert at the front of the camera, that they felt that it was worthy of production, but that actually they didn't want this expert. And the expert happened to be me. I happened to be the writer as well. I didn't particularly need to be front of camera, but they wanted me to be. So when I picked myself up, I was deeply shocked. I chatted with them. They had been fine the day before because we'd had a meeting. I was like, whatever's happened? Anyway, I did go to a lawyer, one that deals with a lot of film and celebrities, actually. I'm not a celebrity, that's obvious, but I'm talking that they do.
You are in my world, Danusha, just
Stop. You're making me laugh. That's very funny. But nevertheless, I went to people that Pitt and etc., Jolie had gone to, because they happened to be my clients. Yeah. Not because any other reason, but I was working with the senior team at the time.
Well, that's quite handy and fortuitous, isn't it?
It was very, very handy. So they know this world. They know this world of contracts around TV, film, etc., inside out. And I went to them and they said, well, this is very disappointing, but it is their prerogative if they just want to drop expert. You could be an exec producer on it, but I'm afraid it's a bit of a shame. We will write to them. It's a bit of an exchange, and that was fine. And they said, look, don't know that we can go forward, but just watch the space. Just watch the space, Danusha. See what happens. Yeah. 3 weeks later, I received multiple emails from friends, colleagues, etc., saying, there's a really interesting call for an expert. You might want to go for it. I'd kept this under wraps. I'm not the kind of person to kind of go out in social media going, oh my God, I'm making a TV program. Nobody really knew I was doing it. And we were far on in the process. Anyway, I looked at this call and I thought, that's odd. That sounds like my program. So I didn't say anything to anyone. I thought, and they were asking for consultants who work in the boardroom to front a program that was very innovative with a little bit more detail that was my program. So I called them and they were going to cast 3 people. They wanted 1 expert, but they were going to only see 3 people. And there were hundreds of applicants, as you can imagine. Anyway, I talked to them about what I thought this format might be. And they said, you know what, we have to have you. We have to see you. So I found myself the next week in front of in a studio, casting for this program. And to cut it short, I got the job of expert on my own program. I was absolutely clear this was my program. And in fact, during the casting, the producer said, do you know what? It's almost like you know exactly what we need.
No.
Yeah. And I said, well, isn't that funny? Gosh, because obviously I had to go in and pretend that I knew nothing. It is, you could say, but weren't you worried, Danusha, walking into that production company, that they would suss who you were? But I know corporate. And I knew that the legal team wouldn't have been told, it wouldn't have rung the production team and said, don't interview, don't audition a woman called Danusha.
Yeah, this woman is on the red list. Don't let her anywhere near our program. Yeah.
Mainly because that would have been tantamount to accepting that they were actually stealing it. Yeah. So, of course, they didn't think that I would hear about it, go for it, and get it. But I did all of those things. And then I called my lawyers and said, I didn't ask, but I've done this. And they howled with laughter, nicely, but they were like, oh my God, this is so hilarious. And then they wrote the letter to say, you've stolen my client's format. And you can't, because you've just given her the job of expert on her own program.
Were they kind of fronting it through a different name company, or did they even have like the same name when they were advertising for it? What had they done to try and hide that? Had they done anything to try and hide that?
No, nothing. No, they hadn't.
They just had hoped that you wouldn't see it, really, I suppose.
Yeah, what happened was, I imagine what the thought process was, and I don't believe it was personal. I don't think, because there was actually, all they had to do to make it more cost effective for them was to actually just cut out the middleman, who was the person that wrote it. I mean, it's not, it's a lesson in protection. Really, there was not a lot I could do, actually, when they said, we're just dropping the idea with an expert. But the minute they put the ad out mentioning expert and what the format was in very basic terms, they were making it clear that it was potentially my program. When I went for it, I couldn't have got them on that, but because I went for the audition, and got it, and then they revealed details about the format that were definitely in the original format. It was very difficult for them. In fact, to be honest with you, it was impossible for this company.
It's really interesting, because format rights are actually quite a tricky area of copyright law, as I'm sure your lawyers advised you at the time. And actually, there have been quite a few cases where court cases, where format creators that have been in to pitch to TV studios have actually failed to establish copyright protection in those formats. The whole thing about copyright is the copyright protects the expression of the idea and not the idea itself. So what I always suggest to people, because I've had quite a few clients and members of my Savvy Share Business Club where they're concerned about going to pitch ideas for various different things. So I've been helping a graphic designer with something like this at the moment, because has found previously, she goes in to pitch a great idea. They say, that's wonderful. And then they bring someone cheaper in to actually execute that idea. And really, the only way that you can protect against that is to have contractual protection and to say, look, you agree, effectively a non-disclosure agreement that says that, you agree to not use any of the ideas that we share with you for the purposes of your evaluation as to whether to proceed with us or not. And you may not do X, Y, and Z with those ideas. So even that is a little bit open to challenge, but it's generally quite hard to show that ideas that you've pitched are actually capable of copyright protection. So how did your lawyers put that over?
It was fortuitous that we weren't just in pitch stage. So it wasn't a pitch any longer. They had already agreed, and they were now trying to renege on a certain piece. They were getting out of it by saying the format could go, but they didn't need an expert anymore. So I could come out of it, albeit that I could work on it, but I couldn't. They were kind of diluting it. And of course, really, they also then followed it up with, well, we just won't make it. So they actually said they weren't making this. So we were considerably further than only a pitch. In my business, I work under NDA all the time. I have to. For a number of reasons, I routinely work with an NDA process because I'm party to incredibly sensitive material at board level. Really stuff that I just can't talk about and mustn't talk about, and I don't, obviously, with major brands. And so it was because I was rookie, because I never for a minute assumed that I would walk in with this idea that I really thought was good. It remains good, and it's not over. Certainly not with the first iteration, it's not. But of course, what happened, because it came back to me, I was able to establish ownership of that. I didn't, my lawyers did, but I didn't expect it to be taken up. So you don't really think that anyone will steal something because you're not sure if it's a great idea, then why would you go in? But in my ordinary business, if I can call it that, of course I would. And I have. I've gone into, a fintech project that I'm not in fintech, but I had an idea. I went in, I wouldn't even discuss it with the fintech company who did take it up. I wouldn't even discuss it unless I had an NDA. I was like, no way, no, because I know this is good. So you're going to want it, which sounds incredibly arrogant, but actually better to be seen as arrogant than.
Well, you're protecting your interests, aren't you? So,
yes.
No, absolutely. Did you get to a resolution then in relation to the format stealing? Let's call it what it is. Let's call it the format stealing.
The format stealing. Yes, the format stealing was given back to the rightful owner. Yes, it had to be stopped and not put into production because of that. Because I was already being offered the job of that expert presenter.
Yeah. And are you hoping to be able to take that format to another producer in time?
Yes, I was already in conversation with, there's a very big baking program. Let's just say that. Very big. We were just at the pandemic. I mean, it's not the right moment. It's about timing and appetite of the viewers. It's all about that. And so we had to shelve. Access is very difficult at very senior levels. And that's what was exciting about this project. So yes, I'm fully able to take it forward. I am. And there's interest. So, but it's timing.
Wonderful. Well, good luck with that. And
thank you.
I mean, it's fortunate that you're in a financial position where you could afford to hire, and you had that personal connection, where you could hire the specialists in that area, because obviously that is a very it's not just a specialist area of law, it's a very specialist area of copyright. So you're lucky that you had those lawyers to on your side to be able and be able to financially afford them as well, to resolve that for you.
Well, Suzanne, the whole point on that, just to be clear, is that it is exceptionally rare for an individual to take on something like a TV company or a TV production company about a format or any IP issue, because of course they have the financial resources to wipe the floor. Yeah, that's why it was so important to go in and establish and have the chutzpah, I think, to actually walk in and attempt to audition for my own program. That's the main thing. It's what was I risking? I might not have got it, but I could establish whether it was mine. I didn't anticipate actually being awarded that expert place, but it was wonderful. It was meant to be, and it was a massive lesson for me. Massive,
and a great story to tell for sure. So I'm sure you're a regular listener to my podcast, so you know that we also discuss what's the worst that could happen in your business. And I know, because we had a chat just before we went live, that equally this is a story that I suspect most people haven't thought about, and it did actually happen. So when I say, what's the worst that can happen in your business, normally it's a hypothetical, because it's well, this could happen, but I've got those protections in place, etc. And actually, in your case, Danusha, the worst happened, but you had a very lucky result. So talk us through that.
I was hired by a well-known bank to be advisor to the board, and as a result of that, was actually not assigned to the board, but the contract was between the CEO and myself. Yeah. So that's important to know that. It was his name and my company's name, obviously with the bank's name there, but it was about him as the access point, the CEO. So cutting it short, we had a number of years. This was a long-term strategic piece of work. It was a merger. It was very exciting and wonderful work. And he died. He dropped dead suddenly, 52 years old, not ill.
That's not a foreseeable, certainly in contractual terms, probably not a foreseeable event that's going to happen partway through a contract, especially when somebody is at that age. I mean, it's a terrible thing to have happened. But what did that mean for you? Because presumably that was a very high value contract that was fairly long term, certainly over a year, I would imagine. What did that actually mean for you?
Well, it was a shock to the entire board, obviously. So there was that whole emotional piece. It was a shock to me. I was extremely close to this guy. But what it meant from a commercial perspective was that there was an outstanding remaining chunk of money. And it It's very high ticket. So I was like, okay. At some point, I need to mention, having been invited to be a coffin bearer, that actually, are you ever going to pay the remainder of this contract? Or do I just need to assume that I'm afraid he has died and you will now review what you do? Actually, the work still some of it was to be done, but they could have made that decision because I hadn't anticipated that he would die, and nor had they. So clearly they could have said there was no clause in the contract, which is a relatively tight contract. It's been drawn up legally, but that unfortunately hadn't been put in. I have thought about it. I've got to confess, I've thought, well, at some point, somebody might drop dead. What do we do?
You had actually thought about that. Well, that's most people wouldn't have given that any thought. So that's one thing.
Well, because I just had, because I can't remember why I'd thought about it, but I know it had passed my mind. And I was like, don't be silly. Come on. I had thought of two circumstances, which is, what if they fire them? Because quite often I do some exit work, we'll call it, but that's part of the contract. Yeah, so that's okay. But actually, what if they really have to get rid of this person during this contract? So I have thought about that one. And that led me to death. Yeah, I didn't have it in there. And so I had to talk to them. And they could have said, no, contract's over now. He's dead. Or they could say something else and negotiate. Or they could pay the entire thing, even though he was absent, because the main relationship was through him. Even though he disseminated it, it was that was on the contract, and I knew it. So yes, you're right. I was very lucky that the long-standing relationship with that bank meant that they honoured the entire remainder of that contract. But I laid myself open to an exposed position. My business was exposed because I failed to actually put that in. I hadn't done that.
It's a really interesting legal point, because actually the death of that individual in that case, where it was you were very much hired for him and there was that personal relationship, would have been frustrated. So frustration is a legal concept, and a contract can be discharged on the ground of frustration when something occurs after the formation of the contract, which renders it physically or commercially impossible to fulfill. And if a frustrating event does actually happen, then the parties don't have to perform their side of the contract. So the bank wouldn't have had to, you wouldn't obviously have had to strategize and consult, but equally they wouldn't have had to pay you. So I think frustration probably would have occurred there. To be honest, even if you had a contractual, the only way you would have got round it, because frustration has to have an element of being something beyond what was contemplated by the parties when they entered into the contract. Yes. So if you did have a clause in there that says, in the event of his death, X shall happen, then that would have been in contemplation, and therefore there'd be an argument that the contract wasn't frustrated. Or you would deal with it, and then there might be a case of, well, we commercially don't want to do that because you won't be working for that 6 months or however long it is. So then they might have said, well, if that does happen, then, we would move you to another, the incoming CEO or something like that.
Yes.
But equally, your payment would have been protected. You would have negotiated that up front in that eventuality. So that's a really interesting point. I don't think we've had anything on the podcast that is in any way strayed towards frustration as a legal concept. So thank you for bringing that to us. And like you say, you were exceptionally, I suppose, lucky in a way that the bank did decide to not call in the lawyers and decide to fight that and not pay you out. So it must be your charm and your many other talents there, Danusha, that got that result for you.
I think it's actually it's very nice that you say it, and I think it's actually that the bank was already reeling from such a dreadfully shocking event, that the idea of then legally protracting that out with his advisor is actually pretty unseemly. Not to say they wouldn't, but because of our long-standing relationship, and we still have one, actually it would really, it was 500 People Plus memorial in the city. I mean, this man was extremely well known. It would be awful. But of course, that's not a commercial reason. But we're humans. Businesses are humans, so.
Well, in any event, whatever their reasoning was, you didn't lose out, which is great to hear. And it's brought up a very interesting legal point as well. Thank you for that. So, Danusia, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing those two very unique stories with me. I feel like I need to do a 6-month check-in with you to see if you've got any more unique stories that we can have you back on the podcast.
No, hopefully not. No, that's
I know
enough.
If anyone's going to bring me a unique story, it's going to be you for sure.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing those stories with my audience. And if you want to find out more about Danusia, if you are certainly in the parenting space, then I know Danusia's always got lots of exciting things up her sleeves in that regard. So we will put details as to how you can contact Danusia in the show notes. Equally, if we've got any extremely important CEOs or large multinationals listening in, then you might want to get in touch with Danusia for some consultancy. So there you go. Wonderful. Right. Thank you so much, Danusia, and I will see you very soon. You take care.
Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope you did, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts, or email me on hello@schoolformothers.com. That's hello@schoolformothers.com. Well, that's all for now, listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic week, and of course, stay safe. Sending you lots of love.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusia and her guests on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep, and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.